Ruth E. Carter, costume designer for Coming to America. This is your seventh film with Eddie Murphy. So, how did this become lucky number seven?
Lucky number seven.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I didn't even realize that it had been seven films with Eddie, all spread out through the years. And
It's like 2 decades, right?
and he took a big break, like he says. He likes to say he was on the couch. Uh,
Yeah.
but I did Dolomite is my name with him just before Coming to America. And so we kind of rolled into Coming to America. It was really nice to continue an artistic journey with such a brilliant comedian and actor as Eddie Murphy. I love working with him, and it was nice to be reunited after his break.
I mean, there's always been like rumors and discussions over the last 30 plus years now about a sequel to Coming to America. So when you were working on these previous films with him, did he ever like bring it up to you? Like, hey, would you be interested if this ever happened?
Yes, it was brought up to me, and I usually, when I work with filmmakers, I hear all of their desires and dreams about the future films that they want to do. That was quite common with John Singleton and Spike Lee as well. So I usually just, go on the ride with them and converse about how exciting it would be to do another Coming to America, and what does that entail, what the story might be. And this one turned out to be a continuation from the first one. So we had discussions about it, but nothing's real until, I start and kind of, go along.
Well, Deborah Landis did the first film. So did you talk to her at all about this?
Oh, I've talked to Deborah so many times about Coming to America. I mean, even after I did Black Panther, we talked about Coming to America on panels, and just, working with, African royalty, and the idea of the Afro future is a conversation that's been had quite a bit. So by the time I got on to Coming to America and I looked at all the details from the first one, I knew that this was not a repeat of the first movie. And I could recognize a lot of the African elements that were brought into that one. But that was, 30 years ago. So now we are in, a much more, a different realm. People are a little more astute about, African royalty. So I wanted to bring something new. I didn't want to mimic the first one, but there were certain key things that I think it was important to have, the barber shop and, the baldricks. And there are certain key elements I think people were waiting to see in the second one. So
Yeah, those are like the nice Easter eggs for the fans who would find. Yeah.
wanted to make sure I paid homage to Deborah's great work from the first one.
Mhm.
When we went into the barbershop, we really tried to match her aesthetic exactly. It's almost like they were stuck in time. So that was fun. It was a fun movie to do.
Well, I mean, the plot of this one is an inverse of the original because it's Lavelle coming to Zamunda from America. So you spend most of the movie in Zamunda. So you got to, just like with Wakanda, create this look for this fictional country. So how did you go about doing that?
Well, this was a comedy, so it was a much more lighthearted approach than Wakanda. I mean, when I was working on Black Panther, I'd say to everyone, this is not Coming to America, people. When I got on Coming to America, I'd say, this is not the Black Panther. Very different. And I just wanted to be a little bit more into the fantasy and the lightheartedness of the story and not get too heavy. So the approach was different, but it was the inverse. We, instead of coming to America, we were going back to Africa. And so I got to explore, how King Akeem lived in Zamunda.
Mhm. There's so many like gorgeous like African prints and just like the fabric. So how did you go about sourcing those, and how many did you make yourselves?
Oh, there's no need to make African fabrics. They're so plentiful, and car fabrics, and I have a fabric curator who's from Ghana, and You know, we worked with a lot of African designers, and you know, we did do the royal print, if you would, of masks, and we put it on, we embroidered it on everything. We just really had fun with, you know, the idea that the royal family would have the royal print, and we could use that in several ways, in several applications.
Mhm. Well, now that like Akeem is king, like how did you like see the evolution for his look and like how he would dress as a king? Because one thing I noticed was like he wore a lot of robes, and I'm not a big robe person, but I loved all of his robes in the movie. Like there's one with like it's like beaded, I think, like it's like trimmed on the side.
Yeah, we worked with a lot of those kinds of things that would be, you know, synonymous with living in your palace home and, you know, wearing the royal robes. I think it was even written in the script somewhere, but you know, Eddie Murphy is older. He was the same age. Was he 21 when he did Coming to America? The first one. He was quite young, and now we're, you know, older. And so I just really wanted to approach it from, you know, a father, a king, you know, taking over the country, and how he would adorn himself as, you know, the leader of Zamunda with, you know, a young family. And you know, there were so many cameos in it. It was fun to play his look against the others, like Wesley Snipes and Leslie Jones. So we kind of wanted to make this surrealistic view of the king, so we could play with the other characters too.
Mhm. And one of like the show-stopping costumes is Tiana Taylor's like cage dress, I guess is how you can describe it. So how did you go about making that one?
Oh, we went to a woman who specializes in the cage wear. And she told me about a dress that she made out of chainmail, and it was at her parents' house. Her name is Laura DeWitt. And she sent it to me, and I thought, you know, we needed a gold dress like the first movie had, with the young bride who was jumping on one foot and barking in a gold dress. So we needed a gold dress, and her cage dress was gold, and I thought it was perfect for the scene. So she loaned it to us.
And then at the end we have Maremi's wedding dress,
Yeah.
gorgeous red, that humongous ruffled train. So where did that come from? How heavy was that? How did she walk in it?
Well, the first movie had a train that, you know, like went down the runway.
It's like 100 feet long. Yeah.
So the second movie had to have one too, since there was a wedding at the end. And we had it on a dolly. It was actually on wheels behind her because it was very heavy, and she needed to walk and could not drag a long train like that. So we had wheels built underneath it so she could walk in. Great.
That was like separate pieces or one whole dress and just the dolly underneath it?
Oh, the train was separate. We take
Okay.
the movie, we take the train off so she can actually, you know, really move around a party. But yeah, so
No human being can drag that train.
it was owed to the first film as well.
So would you do a Coming to America 3?
Would I do one? Of course I
Mhm.
would do one. I would do, you know, I love working with these comedians. They're hysterical, and they're really game for experimenting and having fun and being playful with their costumes. So of course I would.
What do you like foresee like the next like evolution for Zamunda? Or well, I guess we need the story first, but I imagine you would spend more time in Zamunda.
Well, I would guess it would be the daughter who is now king, and she rules Zamunda. So we'd have to see how a woman rules the country.
Mhm. I love Kiki Flane's costumes as well. Like it was like a lot of like Puma inspired outfits.
Oh yeah, we repurposed a lot of athletic wear with Puma, which was one of the sponsors, and then she had a lot of royal wear, royal gowns and things too. So yeah, we had a lot of fun with her.
Well, Ruth, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time, and fingers crossed for Coming to America 3. I don't know how you work in the number in the title in that one. They'll figure it out.
Thanks.
Janty Yates, you're Ridley Scott's longtime costume designer dating back to Gladiator, but I understand you discovered House of Gucci through his wife, Janina, and she had the story for over 20 years. So can you talk about how we finally got to this movie?
Well, it certainly did the rounds, this movie, because Janina would come on set and she'd be talking to Ridley about it, and I'd go, don't forget me, don't forget me. And then it would go away for a couple of years, and then it would come back and go around maybe directors at Ridley Scott's company. And it even went to Wong Kar-wai. And then it came back 2 years ago. And I kept saying to Janina, don't forget about me. And they very kindly allowed me to have a go at it.
How familiar were you with this story? Because I feel like, you know, or at least like in America, like everyone knows about the Versace murder and not so much about Gucci. So how familiar were you with this?
Because of the script, I was very familiar. I think, probably the only one in England who knew about it. And I think the whole of Italy knows about it. It is their Gianni Versace. But because Gianni was murdered in Miami, you know, it was American news. But I don't think anyone in Europe knows about it, apart from every single Italian in the world. And me, now a lot more people will know about it. And I think it's great because it was really terribly shocking. And spoiler alert, she did do it.
It's historical. People can Google and look it up. So where do you start with a project like this? It's like so large and encompassing, covers like 3 decades, and it involves fashion, and you need like vintage clothing as well.
Well, basically, I'd had a year because I was sent the script 2 years ago, and I actually thought it was going to happen, and I happened to be in Rome. So I recruited all my Italian crew, and I went off to the Gucci Museum in Florence, which is a complete wonderful resource that has films running on the wall of their workshops back in the 40s, of Gucci and Madame Gucci, and all the family history is all on the walls. It has things like tennis anoraks that Gucci designed. It has every single jewel, every single shoe, everything. It's wonderful. So I did that, and I felt quite knowledgeable just after my time at the Gucci Museum. And then it went away. So I then picked it up in between our 2 lockdowns for research and development. I was actually employed for that one. And my team in Italy were still happy to wait and join me, thank goodness, because it was quite big. But regarding the decades, as I was just mentioning earlier, both Ridley and myself, we knew the decades very well because we'd lived them. And so we'd sort of look at each other and wink and go, yes or no or whatever. So we've done that on 2 other movies. American Gangster was set in the 70s, and All the Money in the World was also set in those periods. So we've had quite a bit of experience. Obviously, this was a much more fashion-oriented movie, and it was over 3 decades. So that was a bit more of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. I read an interview with you where you said like Lady Gaga does not repeat a single look in this movie. And when I was watching it, I was like, she really doesn't. And there's a lot of outfits in this movie. So how many costumes for her specifically were there?
54.
54. Wow.
Couple were things like jeans and jackets towards the end, as you know. So I didn't really necessarily count them, but I had a fantastic cutter and his team who just made the most wonderful outfits. I had access to archives, had access to the Gucci archive, and I went to Florence and we looked at that, and then we sent it to LA. It fit LG like a glove, all of the archive, extraordinarily. And then the costume houses in Rome, also, 3 of them had wonderful archive as well. Plus, LG opened up her archive, which was amazing. A lot of it not quite suitable, but as you can imagine.
It was like you can't wear like the meat dress in this movie.
Exactly.
Well, she also she said that she wanted to look like her mom in this movie, like not sort of kind of like I guess like elegant, like Italian woman, not what you think of as like kind of like pastiche, like 80s like fashion.
Exactly. I compiled a file because obviously I was researching the granny out of everything, and I compiled a Joan Collins file for Ridley because we thought that would be it for Patrizia. And he went, no, he didn't want to go that extreme. He wanted a Gina Lollobrigida look. And I was slightly nervous to mention this to LG, but on our first Zoom with Ridley and Janina Scott, she announced she wanted to look like her mother. And that was just brilliant because that gave us a lot more area to play in fact. And she didn't even once mention the meat dress.
Well, the other one of the other colorful characters in this movie is Paulo, played by Jared Leto, and that he is, I guess, what everyone would call a scene stealer in this movie, and he dresses very colorfully and loudly, and then he has this like I guess velvet purple suit, it's like belted. So, how did you go about designing his look?
Well, I was very fortunate because I approached the Attolini brothers. They are tailors from Naples, and they are the most superb tailors in the world. They go and commission their own cashmere in Scotland. They have their own checks that they, weave it to. They're just completely original, and they did all the costumes for all the tailoring for The Great Beauty, which was, to me, it was one of the best tailored films of that period. And also I knew that Jared knew his costume, knew his wardrobe. So when I offered them up, as it were, he was delighted. But we went down there and had so much fun picking the dandiest of the dandy checks, the dandiest of the dandy stripes, that, but we didn't get it all on screen, sadly. Mm. And the pink corduroy Norfolk jacket suit, I did. That was from my mad brain.
How many did you make from scratch?
For all the main actors, everything. Except for, no, because I had access to, for LG, I had access to all these wonderful vintage archives. Tirelli had a huge, great room of costume from the 80s and the 70s. And Patrizia Reggiani did not wear Gucci, really, not that much. And she wore Yves Saint Laurent a lot of the time. So we had Yves Saint Laurent. I had rails and rails I had access to. So that was so fortunate. And 2 other costume houses as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite look in the movie? I know you haven't seen it yet, but of what you remember of what you put everyone in, do you have a favorite look?
I do remember quite a lot of the movie. Well, the bridal dress is my favorite because we created that from just literally scratch. And we also made the real bridal dress that she wore, which we took obviously from photographic reference. But the wow factor of the dress, because it had lace hand sewn onto it all over, and the work that had gone into it was 6-8 weeks of work from my cutter. I loved that beyond belief. And I thought she looked so beautiful in it.
It's a great scene as well. Well, Janty, thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking with you. We'll see you back here in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Kirsty Cameron, costume designer for The Power of the Dog. This is Jane Campion's first film in 12 years. How did you come aboard this project?
I actually pitched for it. Jane approached me, or she approached me and then asked me to pitch, and I did, which was a really great experience. It kind of gave me like a great kind of entry point and beginning into working on the film, and obviously she liked what I pitched. So yeah, it was very exciting because I have huge respect for her as a filmmaker.
So what exactly drew you to the project, and what did you pitch her?
She drew me to the project. Jane, I mean, I just, I saw Sweetie, which is her first film in the 80s, I think, and loved it, and A Portrait of a Lady, and she's just such a force, and I loved In the Cut as well. And of course, since then, recently she's been making the Top of the Lake series over in this part of the world. So she drew me to it. Plus I read the book and it's just extraordinary. It really, really is worth reading. Anybody reading it's a fantastically written book, and the script is very economical and beautiful kind of telling of the story. So yeah, all of those things. And I just kind of went into it really, and tried to go underneath it and underneath the characters, and that's what I spoke about. And I did a lot of image referencing and sort of mood feeling, and yeah, and here we are.
Yeah, well, you've worked on a Western before, right? Slow West with McPhee. Yeah, so how did these two compare?
Yeah, I know it was cool and weird to work with him, twice on two films that involved horses and hats and boots and things. I loved Slow West. Was amazing working with John McClane, who's an English director, and came out here to make the film with Michael Fassbender, obviously, and Cody. They're kind of really different tonally, the two films. But I think what Slow West gave me, because we made pretty much not like 90% of that costume, all of the, as what we often do. I was just lucky at the time in New Zealand, it was very slow. There wasn't really much going on, and I was able to employ some really great textile finishers and sewers and stitchers and pattern cutters, which perhaps might not have been possible under busier times with that budget. So that sort of stood me in really good stead, I think, for making, for the work that we did for The Power of the Dog, in terms of making all the kind of the cow hands, clothes, and fills, well, pretty much everything. But it just kind of gave me a really good way into working with the canvases and breaking them down, and the dyeing and the sort of the details, really. So yeah, there was definitely a good connection there. I think it put me on a good foot.
Well, the looks for all four main characters are so distinct, and it told you so much about them, especially the three men. And the film is, about masculinity and toxic masculinity, and they're like three different representations. So how did you approach each of their looks?
I think that, to be really honest, it's really there. It's really there in the book. It's really there in the script. And it's like clothing is quite a sort of has quite a presence in both the script and book, in terms of kind of construction of self. Phil's sort of in a sort of fear of his own sexuality, and has sort of this armor that he creates, masculine armor that he creates, which is kind of like, and in the way he wears his clothes as a sort of second skin. and the kind of sound of his boots on the stairs in the house, and that sort of tension that happens from his personality, which is also very much embedded in his kind of appearance. And the same with Peter, you know, that this kind of restraint, I guess. And I think that's, and you know, restraint is something I employed, you know, majorly in the film, obviously with all the male characters. Their clothes almost become a little bit like uniforms. But that is all in the book and the script. It was really just kind of like listening to that and pulling it out and working with the actors as to how to make that work with them so that they could embody the costumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, in Phil's case, it really is like his clothes are his uniform, because it's like a plot point in the movie. Like he doesn't bathe, like he doesn't shower, like he like
yeah.
clothes, and they're often dirty. So I was, what went into like distressing the clothes too after you make them?
Oh, huge amount of work. Yeah, which I love. I really, really love that whole aspect of costume design. I love, you know, what you can do with, and that's where canvases, like working in this kind of time period, or just working with workwear really allows you sort of great freedom because you're using canvases and fabrics that are quite robust. So you can do so much with dyeing and then sort of painting them out and sanding, and so a lot went into it, so much. And I had really great people and who did that. Dan was our breakdown person, and yeah, couldn't have done it without him.
He also wears these like really humongous woolly chaps in the movie.
Yeah,
so what went into those?
We made those actually. So we did, Emily, who assisted me, and I did a trip to LA, and we went to the costume houses. This was in the early pre-production. And we that was one of the things that we knew we'd have to get out of LA was the chaps, and obviously some boots and hats. So we sort of did a really good pull and sort of study of the chaps and bought a couple of pairs back. But Phil's ones, and there's another pair in the film, a pale pair that we actually made, had a fantastic leather worker, Helen, who did, you know, we made a lot of the belts and a lot of the spurs, and those chaps, which became not the leather ones that he wears, but definitely the sheepskin ones. So of course in New Zealand we have a lot of sheep, so that's wasn't hard to find, but again, just breaking them down to get the texture right, and dirty enough, you know, daggy.
They're definitely eye-catching. Kirsten Dunst's character Rose, like her character, it's, you know, she herself is very distressed, you know, she gets bullied by Phil, but it's funny because like once like the clothes she wears, they have more color to them, while like the men were like darker or like muted or like white tones, and she has like that lovely gold dress at the dinner as well, and then like the red sweater. So what went into like her aesthetic?
Well, Rose has this sort of trajectory of like starting off, of course, at the Red Mill, where she's really, you know, not exactly threadbare. She's proud, but she has very little. And when she marries George, of course, she suddenly gets an expense account of sorts, and Phil's, you know, her sort of desperation and despair, which Phil just is manipulating and building upon, sort of throws her into buying. And, you know, it's almost again this kind of using clothing as a kind of construction of self, and you know, putting all of her angst and anxiety into buying more lingerie. And in terms of color, I mean, I think we always talked about her being the color in the film in a sense, even though it's often really quite soft. She does bring that sort of feminine presence along with that bedroom, which used to be the gents, old lady and old gents room with the sort of pink wallpaper. and early in the conversations, I remember sitting around on the floor in my studio with Grant, the production designer, and Ari and Jane and Tanya, the producer, and we were trying to nut out how to use color, and we decided to just use like 5 colors in each scene, that would not the same colors through the film, but to really restrict our palettes for each scene. And so Rose is quite a big part of that, obviously. And she does provide that color in many of the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And finally, what goes into a good cowboy hat?
A lot of anxiety. No, we had a lot of hats made here by Hills Hats down in Wellington, actually, and we also, of course, bought some back and bought some internationally. But I think it's about shape. It's about proportion, and it's about the way it sits on the head, and it's just about the actor being able to own it.
Yeah, you need that confidence, like Phil does. It's like, yeah.
I mean, his hat is sort of battered but there's just something, I mean, Benedict walked into that costume and he needed to know, obviously, that he could really, really own it, because he had to wear it every single day for, 6 weeks or 7 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it was. So his hats, it's like a sort of security blanket.
Yeah, and a lot of cowboy swagger in that hat. So
yeah, he's just got a lot of swagger, hasn't he?
Kirsty, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. I will see you back in a little bit. Clint Ramos, costume designer for Respect. What was your first thought when you were asked to join an Aretha Franklin biopic?
What was my first thought? I think it was one of, disbelief, and then just sort of like the gargantuan task of kind of like following that life and that arc, that narrative arc of what is sort of arguably, the biggest musical star of the 20th century, So I think that was, it was overwhelming.
Well, how familiar were you with Aretha before this?
Familiar, I think, is it would be culturally. I think my mother.
I mean, we're all familiar with her music, yeah.
Right, but I had my mother played a lot of her music, so I kind of knew her from that, and I also experienced her later in her life, and so I was not before the project. I was not familiar with sort of her backstory and everything that happened to her in her childhood and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn like through your research into her life and like her early childhood and early career that informed how you designed for the film?
That she was a whole human being, I think that she was complete in a way, and I think she, there were a lot of like there were struggles, but she also diverges from what is kind of the biased depiction of African American divas. She came from a very genteel family. In when we think of like Aretha, we cannot separate her from the legacy of her family. Her father was a rock star preacher in the African American church and was the mentor to Martin Luther King Jr. And so, I think what did I not learn? I think she's a survivor. I think she's a very complex human being, and that sort of the depth of her talent is directly proportional to the depth of her experience, her spiritual, emotional experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, like for like a public figure like her, like obviously she's well photographed. There's like video footage of her, and I think a lot of times you think about like, oh, you have to recreate like the famous iconic looks that everyone knows, but also it's a biopic. So then there's all these moments of her interior, like day-to-day life that were not filmed or, photographed. So,
yeah, there was.
What is harder? Like imagining like coming up with original designs for those moments, or like recreating like famous moments?
I don't know what's harder for people, but I found the sort of excavation sort of more exciting. The extent, sort of like when you look at the she was not heavily photographed before the Columbia years, clearly. So I had to exhume a lot of I had to create that world in a way with Liesl Tommy, our director, and so for me. It's more exciting to actually conjure up what that interior world is, and I think that's where costume design is, shines. It's in that it's a method of storytelling, conjuring up this human being. So I find that I get consumed by that. The pretty gowns, it's almost it's a science, like you sort of figure out what the effect is, and you go through the making process of it. But there is an anchor to what you're trying to do, but with what she wore when she was down and out, her day wear when she was going through sort of the abuse from her husband, all of that. What was she wearing, and it brings us to sort of the magic of clothing and why we put on what we put on a daily basis. What are we actually trying to say?
And you can see, I mean, her style changes like throughout the decades, but you can see early on when she was still under the thumb of her father, it was more modest, and the colors were a little bit more muted. And then by the 70s, when she's in the civil rights era, she's full afro and prints and more free and wild. So how did you go into arcing her style evolution?
I mean, I read a lot about her, including both authorized and unauthorized biographies, and actually just really looked at sort of what was extant, a lot of the magazines that she was featured in, and a lot of the interviews that she made, I think she was an independent dresser, and I think she's overlooked as a style icon because she actually dressed according to what she was feeling in a particular period, and also, she kind of she wasn't like her contemporaries like Diana Ross and all of them, and she wasn't a mannequin. She was a real life human being. So if you see photographs of Aretha, you will always find the humanity kind of peeking through, and that's what I loved about that research process. You found sort of a strap kind of having fallen, a strand of hair. There was no it wasn't about perfection, but what you saw was a living, breathing human being crafted by God, and that's what I loved about her.
I like the use of the color red because it's also attached to her mother, who died when she was very young, and then there's later in the movie she hallucinates her mother when she decides to sober up. So how did you go about incorporating that color into her outfits?
Thank you for actually noticing that. I think part of the early discussions with the production designer and with Liesl Tommy, our director, was trying to figure out color palettes, and I found it always kind of interesting when we try to conjure up a palette for a real life, right? I don't think we plan color, and so I think throughout the movie, my approach had been I didn't want to do a sort of a color trajectory, so I wanted it to be more spastic in a way, spasmodic in a way. So, the red kind of appears in different moments, the white appears in different moments. And so the red was it was to me anchored both by her grief and also by her yearning for freedom. Her mother represented freedom for her. This was an independent woman who chose to leave her husband, and we envisage her in red. So when Aretha comes to dinner and presents her first husband, saying, "Hey, he's actually coming to dinner. He's going to have dinner with us," and she's wearing red. I also love sort of this idea that her preacher father infuses on her, which is sort of scarlet being the color of shame, right? I think all of the tropes, the color tropes that we put on women, sort of I kind of played with that there. And then I think towards the end, we will see that when she's also at her Lois, she's wearing this red caftan. It's a very, very, very short scene. She's kind of splayed out in the chaise, and she's wearing red too. And then the visitation of her mother. I always love that, because like different people say, oh, it's a hallucination or it's a visitation, you know, and I love that it's vague like that. Like, did she actually come?
Was she there? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, how about those famous moments in like the MSG concert, and then the recording of Amazing Grace, like those real moments, like what went into reimagining those outfits?
I mean, it had a lot to do with Jennifer and sort of scaling Jennifer so that she was able to channel Aretha, but her own Aretha, right? So reinvent her embodiment in that way. So a lot of that was that, but also, you know, I think those two scenes that you mentioned were sort of gargantuan tasks. You know, the MSG moment, we had like over 1,000 extras that I had to dress in like 1968 clothing, and so that was it was just a ton of research, a ton of like excellent costumers, and like it takes a nation to create like a film like this, you know. In like 3 cities, we had like makers in New York, and we were shooting those 2 scenes in Atlanta, and so, you know, I owe a deep gratitude to the wonderful costumers in Atlanta and the craft makers there, you know. So it took a village.
Yeah.
A nation. It took a nation.
Well, I also love like because it ends on like her recording Amazing Grace, and that like turquoise like caftan, like it was so striking. It was like, this is like the perfect like image to like end the movie on as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of pressure because the documentary had just come out when we started prep for the movie, right? So I think it was fresh in people's minds. And also, I think, you know, I wanted to tweak it a little bit so that Jennifer had ownership over it. So the color is it's different, you know, the cut of the kaftan is different, but it closely resembles what Aretha wore. We clearly played with the scale. So Jennifer, who is, you know, much taller than Aretha, looked in scale with that. But then it was actually looking at the documentary, which was really helpful, and replicating all of those characters, like, you know, the film crew and what the family wore, and it was looking at that and making sure that we get that sort of right, because that's sort of the only way I thought we could honor that particular scene with that particular character. And when we shot that, it was church. Jennifer sang like, you know, so many songs for so long, and Liesl and Kramer, our director of photography, just kept on shooting. Like, it was like there's so much footage that is like, it was literally church, you know.
That could be like an own documentary. So
yes.
Well, what is your favorite Aretha song?
I think. I love that song. I love how, you know, what it asks us to do, and, you know, and particularly the way we deployed that in the movie. It's such a turning point, you know. That to me is like a sort of magic of movie making, you know. And I'm really biased to The Rose of Spanish Harlem, because my mother listened to that a lot, you know.
It always comes back to mom. So
yeah, always.
Well, Clint, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. And you get to stay on because everyone's coming back. Welcome to our Meet the Experts film costume design panel. We're joined here by Ruth E. Carter from Coming to America, Janty Yates from House of Gucci, Kirsty Cameron from The Power of the Dog, and Clint Ramos from Respect. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to go way back to the beginning of your careers. When did you guys realize that costume design could be a career for you? Kirsty?
Post art school, I started doing some work with Nikki Caro, and that was after making clothes, and from when I was a teenager, and just really loving style so much. I kind of like put it all together when Nikki asked me to work with her on some films, and it sort of just pennies dropped, and yeah. So that was a long time ago, really, now. And I did her first feature called Memory and Desire. back in the 90s. And that's really when it sort of happened for me in terms of that understanding.
Janty?
When I was 11, and I found my grandmother's treadle sewing machine, and I just didn't look back. I just was making clothes constantly. I was making them with patterns, without patterns. I was drawing every single day, 100 drawings every day. And after I left dress design, dress pattern cutting, and dressmaking college, I realized you had to have a huge amount of money to become a designer, fashion designer, or you had to sleep under your cutting table a la Galliano and produce 11 works of art twice a year. And I just thought, I don't think I'm that talented. You have to be quite extreme, I think, to do fashion, even though I loved it with a passion. I also went and did wholesale fashion, and that was just so soul destroying in the city. It was a very big company, and I just thought, no, it's not for me. So I started to work in commercials as an assistant, but no money, and just gradually built up from there. Probably 10 years later, did my first half-hour film, and then it went on and just slowly but surely blossomed.
Mm-hmm. Clint, what about you?
I come to costume design from the theater, so I wanted to be a director when I was young. So but I didn't. I quickly discovered that I didn't have that. I didn't have that thing, where you could actually tell people to do things. I didn't have that thing, and I love the idea that I could be both public and private with costume design, that it was insular and I could be outward as well. I'd be like, I could be in my studio, or I could be with the makers and people. But I think it was that, I think I fell in love with storytelling, and not necessarily fashion, although when Janty says 11 years old, I remember being really young, and my favorite hangout was my mother's dressing room, and this was the 70s, and I would look at her getting transformed, from her day wear to she'd be going out to a party, and all the lashes, the teasing of the hair and everything, and it was a wonder to me. I'd look at her and be like, look at you, look at what you just did, and I fell in love with that. And I guess that's how I kind of connected all of those dots, and I ended up in costume design.
Nice. Again, your mom, so.
always mother.
Ruth?
Well, when I look back, I can say that I was introduced to storytelling first. My two brothers are visual artists. My older of the two brothers was really a painter and had shows around, and we thought he was the artist of the family, and none of us measured up to him. We just idolized my older brother. And then my brother, who's younger and closer to my age, he and I would draw these characters all the time. We do it in our books, in the corners of our books. And we had a mouse that was like Stuart Little, who was like a Black Panther with a beret and a fist in the air. And so I just loved the creative process from the start. And I don't know how young I was, but I know that I was around materials and creative crayons and crayons and pastels and chalks, and so as I got into theater first, I knew that there were these elements of my life that would converge, and that was being able to enjoy prose and playwrights like Langston Hughes, and I could actually visualize these characters that they talked about in these tenements in New York City. And I very much felt connected to the people and the interesting ways that they were described in literature. And I wanted that those images to come to life when I was working in theater. And so I kind of feel like I didn't have a fashion approach to costume design. I really did have a theatrical one and a passion for telling African American stories that, you know, going back in the 40s in Harlem, I really wanted to bring James Vanderzee to life and Teenie Harris. And it wasn't until I was actually like working on a film where I had to get into fashion, like Mo Better Blues, that I discovered like Columbus Avenue in New York and 7th Avenue. And I had assistants who were coming out of fashion, and it was like a foreign language to me. And I had to hurry up and learn that stuff because I wanted to age and dye something. I wanted to, you know, rip the pocket in the corner or let the ink explode in the breast pocket. I was more into painting the costume than creating a fashion statement. And that's when I realized that I was a storyteller. I've never ever considered myself an artist. Like I said, my older brother is the only artist in our family, and he still paints and does beautiful. He's retired, so now he's painting people's dogs, you know. But because of that side of things, I grew to love the storytelling aspect and the depth of people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you could tell, you know, full stories through costumes as well. So yeah. Well, you guys work so closely with actors. Can you talk about the importance of forming that relationship and building that trust, Janty?
Well, I find, obviously I get my brief from my director, but I find, and then I will do my selections. If you don't have a happy actor and you don't have a happy performance. So it has to be collaborative. It has to be, you know, if she or he hates something, then I just throw it away. It's fine. You know, there's another suit or there's another frock or something out there, space suit, whatever, you know, we can just rebuild. So it's always been, they've become dear friends, and really it's always been so important to actually just make sure that they're happy, they're comfy, as well as, you know, looking, excuse me, shit hot.
That's the most important. So
yeah.
Clint?
I think it's, you know, I lay a lot of foundation to establish a trust, you know, and particularly with respect, you know, I worked with a lot of like exemplary actors, you know, and with Jennifer, like I did a lot of homework. I wanted to make sure I was ready for every meeting, you know, and, you know, I was able to answer questions for her, but also kind of like guide her through the trajectory of it, you know. And then eventually, I think for me, once you establish that trust, you've become an ally to their craft. You know, you've become their sort of the first kind of the frontline worker for their craft. And I love being that. I love being on set with Jennifer and trying to figure out how the costume moved and how, you know, what she needed for that particular scene and how I could assist in that. Like, did she want to feel constricted in this scene? Did she want to take up space in the scene? You know, so all of that were considerations, and you know, you are their biggest ally in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Ruth?
Oh, well, the costume is almost like another character, because you stand in the room with the actor and you develop the idea, and you develop it through several different situations and different, you know, scenes and settings. And I like that actors want to collaborate. And sometimes, you know, you get actors that really do trust you and want you to take it to the next level. And so a consultation is always great, but I think that they really want you to do your best work by bringing to the table, all of the elements that help create this this costume, this character for them, that supports them and supports their performance. So it is a process. It's highly collaborative. I like to be on the same page, but I also like to bring elements that they weren't expecting and that really give them joy to wear. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kirsty?
Everyone's talked about trust, which I think is such a huge component of the relationship. I like to create have a sort of very creative space that we can both occupy and sort of meet in the middle of. I mean, often in working in New Zealand, actors, you don't have very long with actors because they fly in from, if they're international actors, they fly in and their time here is quite truncated in terms of prep. So I have to be extremely prepared for that. And I mean, that's psychologically prepared as well as having a lot to offer. And so for instance, with Benedict, I flew down to the South Island and we, from Auckland, where we'd been prepping the film, and we met in a hall. And that's again what often happens in New Zealand as well. I do fittings and with actors for the first time, and for all the fittings and bathrooms of like sort of not very salubrious production officers and things like that, because I do a lot of films which aren't, don't have huge budgets as well. I'm quite committed to those kind of films. And so it's just, it's very much creating a space where for me, where the character can kind of appear. It's almost like an apparition, like together you just, through them and trying on the clothes and sort of just seeing how they work physically, something magical happens in the room. And, there's always that moment where you can feel it, or and it's very exciting. I really, really love that part of my work.
I mean, I feel like that happens in real life too, when you just put on try on clothes and it's just perfect for you, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, finally, what was the biggest fashion emergency you've ever had on set, and how did you rectify it? Clint, can you think of something? Are you still thinking? Should we come back to you?
Oh gosh. I think, well, it wasn't an emergency, but it was certainly nervous making. There are times when like dressing 1,000 background players. That's that's an emergency in and of itself. But I think I think the biggest one was for us. It was pretty smooth sailing until we came to the Amsterdam scene, and the beaters were still working in New York on the dress itself, and we'd not got no fittings, nothing, and we were shooting the next day, and it was shipped to us the same day, the following day, and so we put it on, and it fit her perfectly. And I feel like that never happens, and so that was I was pretty close to death that day.
I'm a firm believer in the costume fairies.
Yes.
Smiling on you.
Yes. You did something right in the past life for them to give you that one. So.
I'm shipping something from one city to the other because it was too long to drive it, right? And you're just praying that it would get there, undamaged and everything. And then anyway, you all know what I'm talking about.
Well, Janty, what about you? And did the costume fairies smile upon you, or they smite you?
They smiled upon me greatly on Gucci because I was able to have access to the Gucci archive, and that was amazing. But one small incident, which has probably been reported, but we arrived having spent weeks on this red satin dress, and LG put it on, and we went down to set, and I was so proud of it. I was sort of trotting behind her, smiling, and Ridley went, what's this? I want legs. I want to see her legs. And it was to the ground. So we put her on an apple box and we cut 2 foot off the dress, this beautiful dress.
Ooh.
5 camera crews just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Well, we were all so praying that we could get a straight line. Luckily, we had wonderful Michael from New York who did it for us. No hem, no nothing. We had to go straight into the shoot. That was quite hairy. But LG is great. She just got on the apple box and got on with it.
Nice. Where's that dress now? What happened to it?
Oh, everything's still in embargo.
Okay, we need to put that in the Academy Museum one day. So like
I
unhemmed.
think they're going on exhibition. I think it's going to be at FIDM.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
Kirsty, what about you?
Oh, I just do not feel like I can compete at all with these guys in terms of fashion. I guess, yeah, I think just probably actors turning up with very little, like it's not really an emergency, but I was just thinking about Ben Mendelsohn turning up in the middle of absolutely nowhere on Slow West, and all I had for him was this huge fur coat, sheepskin coat we'd made, and the shirts and pants and boots, and that was nerve-wracking in terms of him, because I have huge respect for him, and he's quite a tempestuous kind of, you know, has a tempestuous reputation a little bit, and so I was extremely nervous about whether he would embody it, step into it, like it, and yeah, so those are the moments for me which can be very nerve-wracking.
You're just nervous about like what they'll think. You have like,
well, there's nothing else, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like you're really on a wing and a prayer of the actor, yeah, really sort of digging what you've made and feeling that they can actually occupy it.
Mm-hmm. Ruth, what about you?
On your side then.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think part of what we do is anticipating emergencies, and so that they don't really play themselves out. So we don't really want an emergency, but at the same time, because we're constantly thinking about what if, some of our what ifs are better than what we've planned months for, and it's crazy. We'll throw something up there against the wall and it'll be fantastic, and you go, yeah, that was me thinking about that just in that one moment, you know, watch me do it. Yes. So it's hard to answer that question, because our lives are built around emergencies and character building. It's really not like, it's not a fashion emergency. It really is a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer. So we're ready for, you know, whatever come what may, because we are nervous. Before that camera rolls, we have every opportunity in the world to make a change. And we do sometimes just before the camera rolls. So I can only think of with Eddie Murphy, he usually doesn't do a lot of fitting. So I have to measure him within an inch of his whole, you know, universe in his body, and make sure that what that one changes. He doesn't want a choice. He doesn't want an option. He just wants that one costume in his closet. So after he's finished preparing, playing maybe his guitar in his trailer, and he's ready to go to set, or they give him a 15-minute warning, he wants to go right into his dressing room, put that costume on, whether it's the first time or not, and walk straight to set and perform. And so every day is a fashion emergency for me, I feel, when I'm working with him. I need to be prepared. And occasionally we had some things that were stuck in customs, that we were having beaded in India, because, you know, he is the king of Zamunda. He has to have beautiful beaded things. And, you know, they were too small, some of them. And I had to always have that, you know, that rabbit in my pocket to pull out and say, okay, then just wear this, you know.
You always had plan A to plan Z. And
oh yeah, C, D, E, F, G.
All right. Well, it was great speaking with you all. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for being here and congratulations on all your great films.